All right, so the last example that I will show you is this one here, this one here, and credits go to no one and everyone. By the way, when I saw this first, I didn't know the artist. The first thing that I saw were the tutorials about it. And I saw this, and what I did and how I learned Cinema 4D is I never did the tutorials first. I tried to get the end result myself first. And after that, I did the tutorial. So I see something where they explain how this is built in Cinema 4D, and then I know, all right, so this is possible to do, so I should be able to do it on my own. And then I first try for an hour or 2 or 3 or days, until I hopefully get there, or something that is at least close. And then I watch the tutorial just to see if I learned something new, or if they have a way of doing it that is smarter, or sometimes I also realized that my way was actually smarter than how the tutorial showed it. So this is something that I can give to you as a hint. When you see tutorials, look at the end result and try to build that stuff yourself first and see how far you get, just so you already know what issues are. Because in the tutorials, you only see answers and solutions, but they rarely talk about what can go wrong and how that would be fixed. So it's always good to know what the actual challenge is and try to get there first on your own, because that way you learn twice. Either you get the confirmation that you did a good thing, you did the same thing as it would have been done in the tutorial, or you did something smarter, or you did something worse, but that way you learn. Alrighty, so, and I've built this myself, and I used the exact same technique that they used, so credits go to no one. How this works is, there is a very nice functionality in hair. That hair can be rendered as geometry. So we know that hair has this special material and has this way that it reacts with light, and in theory, hair is just always super thin, and it just looks towards the camera, so it feels like it's hair. But hair is usually fake. What hair does is, it can take something, and that something could be a texture, and the texture defines how long hair is. So let me start with a plane. Let's give it something like 500 by 500 centimeters and 500 by 500 segments. Then I will go to Simulate, Hair Objects, and I add hair. By default, my hairs are applied to every single point that I have. But if I imagine I have this grid that I need to create, and each pixel should represent one hair, I don't want the hair to be generated on a point, I want it to be generated on a polygon. So instead of using the polygon vertex, I will use the polygon center. So then it updates the amount, so now I have 250,000 hairs. These ones are a little bit too long, so I go down to around 20 centimeters. I will go to the hairs because I want the exact same amount of hairs, and specifically I want the exact same hairs as I have guides. And there, as the root, I can just say, don't use automatics, but use as guides. So I don't have to set how many hairs I get the exact same hairs as I see guides. Then, in the generate, I can tell it that it should not render hairs, instead it should generate something. And that something should be a square. What this does is, it creates a square, and it uses each hair as a sweep. So it pushes the square across the hair as a sweep, and therefore creates something. So let's do that and wait for a moment to update. Now I can see this is what it has created. Here we can see it gets thinner towards the top, and this is defined by the hair material. So I go into the hair material, go to the thickness, and I just tell it that it should be also 1 centimeter thick at the top. I wait for a moment for this to be updated, and now I can see how I get all these squares, essentially pixels that are extruded. Then I will give them, I would have to tell them that they are closed at the tip, which is also under Generate, Advanced, and I want an end cap. Or was it a start cap? Let's wait for a minute. No, that's the one. Then I realized that these are blended in a weird way. So this looks a little bit weird. I don't get sharp edges like we usually get with cubes. And that is because of the Phong tag. If I tell this one to have an angle limit of 0, I will get sharp-edged cubes like I'm used to. Next, I will go into my material, I will go into the length, and I will add a texture to this. And that texture is just an image that I found on my new favorite website, but does it float? Now when I wait for a moment, I can see how I created this height map based on the brightness information of the image. So the brighter a pixel is, the more or the longer a hair will be. The darker it is, the shorter it will be. No, it's an area image of some water things. No, not waves. It works with any image, but these images tend to look nicest when we have different colors that blend into one another. So this is
What website did you say? Was it your favorite website?
But does it float? But does it float.com.
Oh, you showed us this last time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I just really like to go to the random part. Either you can go to a random post, like this. Every time you click on random, you get a random post with multiple images that belong together. Or you can also click on images, and then you have a long, infinite list of images that you can just scroll through, and everything is just completely random and artsy and colorful or black and white, and so cool. And every time you refresh this page, it will always be a completely different content every single time. So that's so cool. Alrighty, so now I have this, and I just need to put some texture on it. Because since this is now not hair anymore, it does not use the color from this. I have to create my own color. For this, I will create a new color. I will go to the ... and I will choose this image. Now to make this work, I have this issue that I only have 500 pixels that I've created, but this has 1600 pixels. So I would have multiple colors on one of the pixels that I've created in Cinema 4D. To fix this, there's a nice little effect. When I go to effects, it's called pixel. And here I can see it just creates a certain amount of pixels. Exactly. So here I then just say, give me 500 by 500 pixels, and then I have a pixelated version of this, which will match exactly with the amount of hairs that I have. I can apply this one then to my hairs, and because there are a lot of hairs and I'm doing the recording on the side, it takes a while to update. But here we go, and we can see how this looks awful. So apparently the UVs are not really working, or we can see how this image is applied to the cube in some way at least. So that's not what we're looking for. What is the projection that I want to use instead? Even better. The other one. Flat. Because with cubic, sorry, I didn't hear that. The cubic would also apply texture to the side, but I don't want this. When we take a look at the original here, we can see that each cube only has one color altogether. So cubic does not work. It has to be a color that is projected from the top. So I will go here from UVW mapping to flat. Then I wait for a moment, and it looks like this. So, I mean, this is something. Could be cool too, but it's not really what I'm looking for. So what is probably off? The rotation. So I select it. I will go to my deck here, to the texture mode, and I can see how this texture is applied. So obviously this is not how I want it to be. I hit R for the rotation, and I rotate it around so that the Z-axis points downwards. Nope. Nope. Well, at least I know this is what I want. -90. Because it's a lot of hair, so it always needs to update a lot of stuff. But now I can see how this is applied from the top. But it's not really aligned with my pixels. It's too small. So I will right-click on this, and I will say Fit to Object. And then it will have the exact same size as my object, and each pixel fits exactly on each hair. Like this. Fancy, isn't it? Alrighty, so this is how far the tutorials usually get, and then they add some little light setup, but it just doesn't look as nice as the originals. The reason is that we have to do all the steps that we usually do when we want to create some nice light setup. So when I want some really nice light, what is the first thing that I do? More general. A sky, and what do I put on a sky? And what do I put into the luminance? An HDRI. So, when we do this, we are already a few steps ahead of most other people. So we know we have our nice website HDRI Haven, and then I will look for something probably outdoorsy, and maybe this one here. Was it the one that I used? Oh no, I think I used this one, Cape Hill. Since it will never be visible, hardly visible in the reflections and not visible in the camera, I can just download a low resolution version of this. So I will go to the 1K version and I download it. I've already done this in the past. Then I will create a sky, the material, and in the luminance, I will put that HDR. I drop it onto the sky. All right, so far so good. Now I already have the basic light setup. When I hit Command R to render, it will take a little bit of time to prepare, and also the rendering will be quite slow because we have a lot of geometry, but we should get a little bit of a feeling of what it's going to look like in the end. When I don't do a recording, it goes a little bit faster. Come on. Show me something. Anything. There we go. All right. So we can already see that apparently it has its own light source that lights up things from the side. We get some nice gradation of things that are higher and things that are lower and some shadows here. So already this is a good place to start. Apparently the sun comes from the top left corner, and I will try to keep it that way. But I will create my own softbox for this. For that, of course, I will use an area light like you said earlier. I want this to be always pointed towards the center, so we'll use a target light, and I will choose my plane as the target object. Then I will move the light backwards, like this. Now we can see how my light creates some nice reflection on here. But this reflection sucks. Remember, when we use reflectance, either don't use it at all, or use GGX and a Fresnel. And this is what we are going to do. I will go into the material that I used for the projection. I will go to the reflectance, and I get rid of the default specular because that one sucks. Then I will go to Add, and I will use a GGX reflection. Okay. And I know that I want it to have a Fresnel, so layer Fresnel and dielectric. All right, so already I can see how everything a little bit on the tip reflects my HDR from the side. So this already gives us this super nice feeling, even if pixels that are close together that have the same color, they will reflect slightly different areas and it will look a lot more natural. And we get this feeling of it being something like just nicer. Next, we have this issue that our light is a box, but for some reason our light is just a spot here. The reason is a material has two things, or a reflection has two things. It has the actual reflection, and it also has a specular. if a light is defined as a specular. So when we have, for instance, a sunlight, it's awesome that it can create a specular light because a sunlight essentially is an infinitely small dot. So that would not be visible in a reflection. A box, however, could be visible in a reflection, and therefore we would go to the light, to the details, we tell it to not be visible in the specular, instead it should be visible in the reflection. And now I can see how I get the actual box being reflected here. It will give me a much more realistic reflection. On top of this, of course, I know that this should generate an area shadow, and it needs to be a lot brighter, because what light looks this pale? So I want this light to be a lot larger, or a lot brighter. So I go to the intensity, and I just increase the intensity. We also know that our lights, especially in a scenario like this, should have a realistic fall-off. So also here, fall-off, inverse square, physically accurate. We adjust the size of the fall-off to roughly the size of the light. Maybe I make the light first a little bit larger, then I make the fall-off a little bit smaller, something, maybe this is a little bit too large, something like this, and that, yeah, about this. Looks about good. Then I will create a camera already, and I tell the camera to be a portrait or even a telelens. And let's try a portrait lens, because this way we get the feeling of being a lot farther away, and we see more things in one view. Then sometimes it's hard to judge what is actually rendered and what's not, because we can see we have these dark edges here, but sometimes, especially in this scenario, it's hard to see them. You can hit Shift V or go to Options and then Configure. Then we can go to the View, and we have the opacity for the tinted border. So here we can change this so we can clearly see what is the actual area that will be rendered out later on. And then I can adjust my camera so that I clearly don't see any borders. Then I want the light not to be this sharp, obviously. So I go into my material, and I go to the reflectance, and I increase the roughness. And this will blend super nicely around. Also, the reflection of the HDRI will blend nicely in the reflection of the elements. And that is all I did in here. And the end result then that was rendered was this one here. And we can see how we just have these really small reflections. We have these super nice high highlights on the tips, and just this overall slightly glossy feeling on the top, which makes it look pretty cool. Then the things that I've added in Photoshop were just some fake depth of field, my default go-to of curves set to soft light and made them brighter, like this. Then some gradient that looks like this, so the gradient map, but with soft light and some opacity applied to it. And then, because I do like it when my shadows are lifted, another layer that lifts the shadows, and a last layer that is simply just a vignette that focuses a little bit more on the center. And then we get this really nice, glowy feeling.
Let's say you want to have that removed to a music video. Is that, you don't have to show us how to do it, but like moving the hairs like in a pattern, is that hard to do? If you do it this way, because this way it's all based on an image.
But as you know, we can use an image as a text, or an image sequence as a texture as well. So you could, for instance, you could, in theory, animate an image like this one here with After Effects. And you could, for instance, mask out certain areas here and animate the opacity of them so that they are brighter based on a beat of something. Another alternative is setting up the entire thing a little bit different. I can show you how it works, but I'm not sure if I can get it right because I have not done this in ages and they changed the tool a little bit. Let's say I have this stick over here, and I then have a cloner, and I tell the cloner to be a grid array, and let's put this 20 by 1 by 20. So here I have a grid that I've now created with actual clones. Because on a cloner, I have the option to go to effector, and I can use a sound effector. And with the sound effector, I can then load in a sound track. Let me see if I have something. This one, for instance. So, load sound and downloads. I have way too much stuff in my downloads. Like this. And let's make this a lot longer. And then, how does it work in the new one? This is applied to everything. How do I apply it to just one? Yeah, all this interface is new. I haven't done this in an older version where I've used it a lot. Remember the video that I showed you? They used this thing as well, but it was a completely different interface.
That's fine. That's fine. You don't
Yeah.
have to-
But this is essentially it, where you can load in an audio, you can hear it as you play back, and it can then deform things, it can move things around. Yeah. But the thing about clones is, especially when we have so many, like the one with the hair, things get even slower. So the hair, even though it is super slow in the performance, is still quicker in the performance than doing it with actual clones. Yeah. All right. Are there questions concerning this? I mean, this is a very specific example, but just an interesting way of connecting things together and create something abstract. All right. Then I would say it's time for the break. 10 minutes. I will check the emails, and then we see what else we talk about today.